Hello everyone, my name is Maria Oreska and I'm responsible for product development at Inphinity. One of our Qlik native products is Inphinity Flow. It started as a process visualization extension to your Qlik Sense, but in the end you can use it for many different use cases, from processes through hierarchies, networks, data lineage, timelines, up to integration and navigation. However, it's important to understand how it works, and that's exactly the reason why I'm recording this video. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you how Inphinity Flow works so you can be creative and think about all those use cases by yourself. What you can see on my screen right now is Inphinity Flow visualizing a simple process, HR process, from application review up to hiring a new employee. It might seem complex because you don't have anything like this in your Qlik Sense applications yet. But in the end, it's pretty simple. Inphinity Flow consists of two different parts. The first one is set of nodes, so these steps of the process. We technically call them nodes. And the second part is set of lines. And as you can see, every single line connects two different nodes. So behind Inphinity Flow visualization, there are two different hypercubes. The first one that contains all the information about nodes, their IDs, type that defines their design, label. Also, there can be tooltip, measure, as you can see here, and information whether it's highlighted, but that's advanced thing. The second hypercube contains information about lines. The basic is to define where the line starts, the ID of a node where the line starts, and where the line ends. And if you want, you can also add labels to the lines as well as tooltips. As you can imagine, these two hypercubes can be two different tables in your data model, the one for nodes and the second table for lines. But you can also utilize Qlik's advantages and use Qlik associations in a data model, as well as all the creativity you can use when defining expressions, because the whole definition of Inphinity Flow is done only in the properties panel, and the data is coming from a data model. And as you can see, for almost everything, you can use expressions. Let's start then with your first flow. Let me go to my SaaS tenant, and here we can create the first dataset we will use. Let's create a main process. That will contain steps. We can start with start. Then there will be a recruit, review, interview, and hire. Okay. Inphinity Flow can be found in the custom object section under Inphinity Bundle. So here is Inphinity Flow. Let me drag and drop it here. And the whole definition of it is done via the properties panel. So in the node section, we define the main information about the node. Node ID is a unique identifier. So step defines nodes I want to visualize. Let me skip node type and add node label. Right now, it will be coming from the same field, and there's nothing wrong about it. So I can see those steps now: start, recruit, review, interview, and hire. And node type is the last thing that's required to be specified. So as I mentioned, node type is the thing that defines the design of these nodes. In the appearance section in properties panel, you can find this section built-in node types. So you can use those, start, activity, connector, decision, and end. That will be automatically applied. If you want to create your own designs, there is additional node types section, but we will come to that. Let's go step by step. So let me come back to script. And we can add information about the step type. For start, it will be start. For recruit, it can be activity. For review, it will be decision. For interview, activity. And for hire, it can be end. Let me load the data again. And in the properties panel, add step type here. So this is what node type means. Infinity Flow can be used even now. You don't need to define the lines if you don't want, but I'm missing them. Especially since it completely makes sense in this process to have different steps connected by lines. So let's define them. As I mentioned, the only thing that's needed, that's required, okay, my mistake, is to define where the line should start, like step from, and where the line ends. So from start to recruit, from recruit, review, the definition of lines in the properties panel is right under nodes, so it's intuitive next step. And here I define the field or expression, how the start point, start node is defined. In my case, it's the field step from, and where the line ends is defined in the field step 2. And this is my first complete Infinity Flow. So nothing else than 2 tables is needed. In case we have these linear processes that's also usable for navigation, we can be even more efficient. So instead of having a standalone table for process lines, let's add step ID to the first table. Okay, I need to be consistent. And we will use step ID in expression for the lines definition. So let's do exactly that. The line starts in step ID and ends in step ID plus 1. And it's okay, doesn't work right now. Because for node ID definition, we have field step containing these texts. And for the lines, we are referring to step ID, and it has to be aligned. So instead of step for node ID, we will use the field step ID, and it works. You might be curious, what are these 2 problems? So let me show you. In this section, show warnings and data. Except for these hypercubes I mentioned to you, there is also the section warnings, and it informs you about what might be incorrect in your Infinity Flow. It's linked to process theory. So if you use Infinity Flow for networks or hierarchies or anything else, you will ignore those. But for now, let's see that the first warning is about outputs. Node type end, that's this here, must have exactly 0 outgoing lines, but has 1. The reason is that in the line section, we have said that step ID plus 1, and naturally it will be derived also for step ID 5. And it's not relevant, so we can say if step ID is less than 5. Let's use this. And as you may see, the other warning has been solved too. Let me share one more thing with you, how to add more additional information to these steps. Let me go to the script and copy and paste table I have prepared. As you can see, the logic of the table, the structure is very similar, so there is the same step ID. Step is more explanatory now. Step type is the very same. I have added information about the responsible person of a specific step of the process, and also additional information what's included. Labels on these nodes have been changed automatically, and that's one of really big advantages of Qlik native extension. It works with data you have in a data model, so whenever something changed there, it's updated within the extension right after the next reload, exactly when it's updated in all other Qlik visualizations you use. So there are two information we should show user somehow: responsible person and description of the process step. And in the properties panel, you see there are two attributes we haven't used up to now. Let me start with measure. It's the information that is visible directly within Infinity Flow when you see it. So let's add this step responsible person here. And whenever it contains information, there is this placeholder for measure showing what is needed. If the result is null, there is no wasted place. Please note it's defined by expression, so instead of having here information about the owner of the step, there can be anything that's calculated or derived based on whatever you have in your data model. Tooltip contains additional information that's available when you need it, so it's something you don't need to see whenever you use Infinity Flow. It will be here if you want to see it. In this case, let's use this step description. So when you go through this process many times, when you use this application on a weekly basis, you don't need to see description of these steps. However, when a new person is onboarded or a new user is using this app, it's pretty helpful to have additional information available within these tooltips. In this video, I will show you many different design options you have available within Infinity Flow. Probably the most important one is the possibility to design your own custom node types. As we already know, the design of these nodes is defined by node type. Currently, in node type, I use the field step type and I use the built-in types. But I can create my own one. Let's say step custom type. Here it remains start. In this case, let's call it recruit, review, interview, and end. When I reload my data model, we see the field step custom time here. and we can use it here in the properties panel of Inphinity Flow. Or so you can compare those. We can do it here. Right now, you see that those designs that are built in are already applied, and what we need to do is to define these new designs we have used. We do so in Appearance section in Properties panel, and here under the section Additional Node Types, you see this select box. The design of your nodes needs to be stored somewhere. And since we are developing Qlik native extensions, we decided to use Qlik content libraries for storing this. Therefore, you can use in-app library or any other Qlik content library that you have available. Let's select in-app library now, and by clicking on Open Editor, I have this pop-up where I can easily add a new node. So I called this new type Recruit. Another one was Review. And Interview. Good sign. As you can see, it has been colored. Another thing we can do is to add your own icons into these nodes. So again, since we are working with a content library, we need to upload these icons there. So in this case, it's in app library, and I can upload my icons right here. PNG is a recommended format, but also JPEG can be used, as well as animated pictures. As I mentioned before, the definition of your custom nodes needs to be stored somewhere, and the place is Qlik Custom Library you selected. So we have selected the in-app one, and therefore we have this file here. This one is the definition of my custom node. But let's use those icons. So in the Properties panel, Additional Node Types, come back to Editor. And here, for every single node type, I can select icon type. It can be external link, so URL, or I can use all those images that are currently available within the Qlik content library. So for Recruit, let's use this doc. For Review, it can be Performance, and for Interview, Discuss. And here we are. As you can see, you can play with the way how the icon looks like, because the background can be transparent, so it's more focused on the image, or there can be white circle background, square background, whatever you want. It's only up to you. Based on the size of these nodes, one might say that review applications is the most important step. It is important, but all of them are important. So let's make them the same size. Again, it's an option you have available within your custom node types editor. And you can find it here. By default, all node types are auto-calculated, but you can define it manually. This number means pixels in the original size. However, when you have many nodes to be visualized within Inphinity Flow, their sizes are recalculated, but the ratios remain the same. So if I now say that all those nodes will be 200, then they are the same. Naturally, you can play with the alignment of the content. Another very important option is orientation. So you can switch between horizontal and vertical orientation. It might be pretty helpful, especially when you are trying to use Inphinity Flow in already existing Qlik apps. So it needs to fit somewhere. There are some other options I will go through in other videos. The last one from this presentation section I want to pinpoint right now is the navigation option. So if this navigation bar you already know from Qlik Map object, doesn't have any value here, you can hide it. Regarding the design, there are also some options on node and line level you can play with. So let's explore the node style section. Here we have the option to rewrite the default color of the node, naturally by expression. So thanks to that, you can say that when there are more than 100 applications, color of this node should be red. Otherwise, it will remain this. Different line types and shapes are supported, so you can play with that and explore all these options available. Also, don't hesitate to use the definition by expression. So, in this video, we have explored how you can use many different design options available within Inphinity Flow. Naturally, one of the most important is to define your own custom node types. These two flows we see here were defined very easily by using inline table we have created in our Qlik script. However, we are in Qlik, so it doesn't matter where the data comes from, whether it's from inline table or database table or Excel file or REST integration or something else. The important part is what's in the data model. Let me show you a bit more complex flow. As you can see, it's not linear as the previous one. And on the left side, you see two main tables. Those are exactly the tables that are in a data model. The main approach is still the same. We need one table defining nodes, or these steps of the process. Unique identifier, text here, sometimes there might be a measure or additional information, also node type, defining colors and icons, and so on. The second hypercube behind Inphinity Flow contains definition of lines, where the line starts and where the line ends. So if you want to create a non-linear process, the only different thing is that you need to define more lines. Like in this case, from step ID A1, application review, I have two outgoing lines. The first one going to reject it, that's R1, and another line goes to initial call, that's A2. And you can only imagine where this data technically comes from. Let's create a new app. I have created a very simple Excel file containing information about orders and order details. In orders, we have unique identifier of a row, unique identifier of an order, status or stage, and the date when the order was in this stage for the first time. It's nothing else than the full changelog of orders. Let's load it to a data model. We don't need order details yet, so this will be it. Some best practices. And load data. When you start with Inphinity Flow, I highly recommend to use Qlik native tables. The reason is very simple. Whatever you can do in Qlik native table when it comes to selections, relations, behaviors, measures, and so on, the same can be done with an Inphinity Flow. It's also really great for testing purposes, naturally. So let's create the table. and Infinity Flow to Infinity Bundle, Infinity Flow, drag and drop. So what we want to do right now is to create a process map showing the paths of orders. So steps of the process are nothing else than these statuses. Node ID, the unique identifier of those nodes, those steps, will be status. Let's keep it simple and use the same for labels. And for node type, when I start, I use one of the predefined node types, for example, activity. We will change that later. It's correct. We have 5 distinct statuses that defines the whole process. And now the more challenging part, and that's how to define those lines that will connect these stages. We will use nothing else than dates from the data. Let's rename this table as a temporary one and create a new one. Yeah, you can use asterisk, but this is more visual and that's better for the video purposes. Okay, drop table, perfect. The main logic behind what I'm going to do right now lies in sorting. When I sort dates in ascending way and then order IDs, I can say that this part of the table contains data only about order ID 1, right? Then there is the section with data about AA2, AA3, and so on. And within this part, I have data ordered in the very same way how the changes happened. Based on that, I can easily say what's the next status from this one. Let's start here. AA1 was accepted. Next day, it was packed. After it was packed, it was shipped. So from packed, the next status is shipped. The same for delivered after it was shipped, and when there is nothing else, it's the most actual stage of the order. But don't worry, we are not going to do that manually in a data storage. We will define the script to do that for us. Let's go step by step. The first thing I did was this sorting. Order by, order ID ascending, and date descending. And then, if previous order ID is the same as order ID, then previous status is the next one. To be sure it's clear, especially this condition, let me explain very quickly one more time. So we have the data sorted by using order IDs and dates, and within the very same order ID, there is a flow of the statuses exactly as they happened. So I can easily say that when the status is accepted, the next one is packed because date is in descending order. And for this row, there is no previous data, so status next is none because delivered is the most actual status of AA1. And when we use that logic for the rest of the table, for AA2, the most actual status is delivered, but there is a previous value. There is accepted, but as we see, it's not linked to the same order ID. Therefore, we can apply this logic only when previous order ID is the same as order ID. And And another important thing is that we are using dates, so we need to be sure that the formats are aligned with the app. Naturally, it's not. So let's change it here and load the data. So here we are. Let's define the lines. So in the properties panel, there is a section lines where I say that the starting points of all lines is in the field status, and those lines end in what's defined in the field status next. Perfect, that works. Let's fine-tune it a bit, and we can start with changing the node types. The way how you can define your own node type has been explained in one of the previous videos, so let's use just built-in node types right now. If it matches delivered or returned, then it's and otherwise it's activity. And as we can see, this diagram has one problem. So we can go to warnings and data here and see that the problem is caused by node type activity we use here. And in the process theory, this node type activity must have only one outgoing line. But here, there are three. If we are okay with that, we can disable these warnings very easily in the presentation section and show warnings off. Let's add the status next also to our table to be sure it corresponds to the flow. And this order, how it's loaded right now, is this one. I want to apply it. What's next? Oh, I want to see durations. The average time order spent between these two statuses. We have exact dates, so there is no issue in calculating it. So the difference between previous date and date is supposed to be duration. And also, you can see that when status next is empty, is null, then this row is the most actual one for a particular order ID. So let's script that too. And load the data. Let's start with the duration part. So on the line, I want to see a label telling me average duration. So line label will be defined as average duration and days. Oh wow, yeah, let's round it a bit. Better, even better. And if you want to create spaces around the text, you can literally define spaces. When it comes to lines, we can also define width. And you can choose from one of the following options, but you can also define width by expression. For example, by using average duration. So thanks to that, it's even more visual for the user. Another KPI we can derive from the data we already have is number of orders that currently are in those stages. And let's visualize it as a measure on nodes. Orders and count distinct order ID, but only those where actual equals 1. Great. We can also add information about how many orders historically were in a specific stage, but it's not as important information as the rest we already see. So let's not make it difficult for a user to understand, but we can use it as an additional information within the tooltip. Now, when I hover my mouse over the node, I see this additional information. And the same I can use for line. It can be the very same expression or something else. It's only up to you what makes sense. Quickly, we will use the order details data. We already have them in attached files because that's this table. And as you can see, there's information about the order ID. That's the connection between those two tables. Then there is item and item type. Again, some best practices. If we want to create hierarchy, we need to create the definition for all the nodes. So in this case, it will be a table, items hierarchy. That contains item type as node. So this category that it's book, it's puzzle, or something else will be a node. It's important to know that it's a category, so we can make it different visually. Let's call it node type. And the rest of the table, so the rest of the nodes, will be coming from items. So the node will be item, and item will be node type. And to define lines between the category and the item itself, we also need to have there the item type. Let's call it category for these purposes. Let's use the very same logic. So we will create a Qlik native table first. The full list of nodes we have just defined, node type, and category. When it comes to Inphinity Flow, let me disable all unnecessary things, and let's start. Node ID is nothing else than node type nothing else than node type. Again, node label will be the same as node ID. And all the lines start in category and ends in the node. Let's reorder the fields. And as you can see, there is a category book with 3 items under it, category puzzle with relevant items, and 1 item in the category light. And since we have defined our own node types, category and item, we can create additional node types for them. For item, it will be this, and for node, the color might be this. Yeah, category. Sorry, my mistake. And that's it. When you will be defining your own flows, you might find out it's quite easy to do so and it takes only a few minutes. However, I wanted to share the full context with you so you know how to think about it. And also some tips, tricks, and best practices. The last thing I just noticed is that thanks to Infinity Flow, we just identified an issue in the data because from shipped, there shouldn't be any move into stage packed. And it's quite hard to spot something like that in a table view. Let's make it selectable. And when we now select shipped, we see that order ID AA9 is the one responsible for the line between shipped and packed. And that might be an inefficiency or data quality or anything else. But the important is to identify it. Thank you very much for watching this video, guys, and I really hope you find it very useful. I did my best.